Hi, I'm Patti. I'm a jewelry designer here at Fire Mountain Gems and Beads, and today I'm going to show you how to make this beautiful quartz, crystal, and silver finish CZ necklace with matching earrings. These layered necklaces are just really popular right now, and we thought that you'd like to see a simple, minimalistic design that anyone can make. Quartz crystal is kind of what I'm featuring here. It's really a versatile, beautiful stone. Being clear like this, it goes with almost anything. You can combine it with other gemstones or glass beads or what have you. A lot of people believe the metaphysical properties of the quartz are that it helps clear your energy and it also helps amplify other crystals and stones around it. So I find that it's a really nice thing just to wear on a regular basis. So I'm going to pull the necklace out of frame here and let's go ahead and get working on this earring. So let's look at what the materials in the earring are. So we've got some beautiful silver-plated AccuFlex, these great little silver finish CZ balls, and we've got 4 of these little kind of natural quartz rondelles. I really like these because they have kind of an irregular vibe and it just gives it more of a natural look to the piece. So we're combining something very finished and very precise with something natural, and I just love that look. These great perfect balance ear wires with the little stardust balls. Those are Rose's favorite ear wire, by the way, one of our other jewelry designers here. A couple of crimp covers, couple of crimp beads, and let's see, I think we've got everything we need. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is just pull some of the AccuFlex off here. And so I'll take, you can see my AccuFlex is on the spool keeper, which is really great for any of your stringing materials that are spooled like this or even wire. Because it keeps it nice and snug in there. It's not going to unravel on you, but you don't really have to take it off in order to get more off of the spool. You can just grab a plier or use your hands if they're not too slippery, and you just pull off what you need. And I'm going to go ahead and cut off, I don't know, 6 or 7 inches of that. I like to cut a little extra AccuFlex when I'm working or whatever my stringing material is. I'd rather cut a little bit off than not have quite enough to work with and have to struggle with it. Okay, so the first thing that I'll do is go ahead and string on the beads here. So I'll string on 2 of the natural quartz. Let me see. I've got really little holes. Gemstones often have fairly small holes. They drill them that way because they're trying to preserve as much of the gemstone as they can. Okay, sometimes I just have to pick them up and have a little bit more control over them than having them on the pad. And if you have eyes like mine, you can see them a little better, a little closer, which is nice. Okay, and then I'll thread on the CZ ball and 2 more of the quartz rondelles. Let's see. There we go, 1 more. Okay, so I've got all of my elements threaded on. These are a really, really easy earring to make, and having this really minimalistic look is very trendy. So now that I have all of my beads threaded onto my AccuFlex, I'm just going to thread a crimp tube on and then a second crimp tube. So we've got 2 crimp tubes threaded on. And then the tail here is going to go in the opposite direction through both of those crimp tubes. Just like that. And then you just have to decide how large you want your earring to be. You can see this one is kind of a medium size. I can go a bit smaller like this. I can go much larger if I really like large earrings. I think I'm going to choose to have it right about there. Okay, so then I'm going to grab my crimping plier and I'm going to use my fingernail to space these out from each other just a little bit. You just want maybe 2 millimeters of space between those crimp beads before you crimp them. So, and you'll be able to change the second one after you crimp the first one. So I'm going to go ahead and crimp down one of those crimp tubes nice and tight. And then I'm going to use the outside little edge of my crimping tool. Let me move the second one away from there. To kind of flatten it further. We're kind of rounding it out there. Okay, and then I always like to do a little test and pull and make sure that it's really nice and tight. And for insurance, I'll take my little chain nose pliers here and flatten it a little further. That's not going anywhere. Okay, then I'm going to grab my crimper and I'm going to grab that second tube and bring it just 2 millimeters away from the first one so we have a little gap. And then I'm going to crimp it down nice and tight. I'm going to use the outside edge of my crimper to round that out, flatten it a little more. And it's already crimped in place, so I'm just going to grab my chain nose pliers and flatten that just a bit more. And both of those are nice and secure. So then I'm going to take my flush cutter, and with the beveled edge of the flush cutter, I'm going to put that against the piece that I'm keeping here. And right up against the crimp bead, I'm going to cut off the tail. I'll flip it around. I'm going to do the same thing with the other tail. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so you are here now. You've got 2 crimped beads with a little space. Then you're just going to add your crimp covers to those. So, sorry, I'm grabbing the wrong plier here. We want my crimper plier. And I'm just with a little outside kind of rounded groove of the crimp plier, I'm going to grab my crimp cover just like that. And I'm going to put it around one of the crimp beads and then crimp it closed. And I kind of go around in a circle, just making sure that it's nicely crimped just how I want it and kind of rounded. Then I'm going to grab my second crimp cover. And go over the crimp bead just the same way. And I want, wherever I'm crimping it, I want those on the back side kind of the same, so that's the back of the earring. So I don't really want to see the seam of the crimp after I've finished. So if we put it in the back, it's not as obvious. Sometimes when you're doing these crimps, you accidentally crimp it kind of halfway. When that happens, I just grab a new one. So you want it nice and open before you crimp it and kind of try to crimp it in a smooth motion. So that happens all the time when you kind of halfway crimp one and need to kind of start over with a fresh one. Let's see, let me get it at a better angle. So just crimping that down in the back, and then I'm going to kind of go around in a circle and make sure that it's nice and rounded out. Okay. So there we have the main part of the earring, and now all you need to do is add the ear wire. So to add the ear wire, I'm going to grab my chain nose pliers, and I'm just going to open up that loop sideways, put the earring through, making sure to orient the front of the crimps to the front of the earring. Let's see. And then just close up the loop. Let's see, I'm going to get that earring in there just right. There we go. And then I'm just going to rock that loop kind of back and forth, the edge of it, so we have a nice tight fit so that won't come out. And there you have your beautiful quartz CZ earrings. Let's go ahead and take a look at the necklace. You can see we have this really pretty layered necklace with 3 different layers. 2 of them are rounded and one of them is coming into a fixed kind of a lariat. And then we've got it with this beautiful CZ clasp at the other end. So the first thing we'll do is make these loops here, very simple AccuFlex loops that'll be more kind of choker length. So I'm going to pull off some AccuFlex. For the first one, generally a choker on most people is about 15 inches. And I like to have a couple of inches of AccuFlex at each end. So I'm gonna pull off, got my measurer here, about 19 inches of the AccuFlex. I wanna make sure I have enough. So I know you can't see this, so I'm gonna pull that into frame. So we're going just beyond the 18 here. And I'll cut that. So I'm gonna go ahead and crimp each end. This is so simple to do. I've got a couple of AccuGuards here. These help keep the wire from fraying over time, your stringing material or your AccuFlex. And they also just give it a really nice finished look. Okay, so we've got a couple of crimp covers, a couple of crimp beads, and we've got one of our small silver finish CZ balls, and that's for that smallest part of the necklace. So I'm going to go ahead and thread on a crimp bead and then thread it through the AccuGuard. So you thread through, the AccuGuard is like a little horseshoe with 2 holes, one on either side. So I thread through one hole, pull it around the top of the AccuGuard and thread it through the other hole. So you can see how that will protect your wire. And then the crimp bead goes back over the tail. And I don't want too much at the end, so I gave myself an extra couple of inches, so I want to make sure that I don't have more than about an inch of tail. This part of it is going through your AccuGuard. Then I'm going to grab my crimp plier and I'm going to close up that AccuGuard. So I'm just basically going on the outside of it and squishing it together a bit so the tips are just about touching. I always do that before I crimp my crimp beads because I feel like I get a more true measurement of how much space is left between my crimp bead and my AccuGuard. So I'm going to grab my crimp bead with my crimpers lightly, and then I'm going to pull up on that so it takes up the slack in the AccuFlex. And then I have it right up against each other, so the crimp bead is against the AccuGuard. And then I'm going to pull it back about 1 millimeter, just a little bit, because I want to leave a little bit of space for that crimp cover to be able to go on. And then I'm going to crimp down nice and tight. And then I'm going to take the outside groove of my crimper and round that out. Then I'm going to do a little test, and a good way to test this is to put your round nose pliers through the AccuGuard and pull. It's nice and secure. Okay, so now I'm going to take my flush cutter and with the beveled edge against the piece that I'm keeping, right up again, and you got to make sure not to cut the wrong wire. You just want to cut that short tail. Snip off that AccuFlex. Okay, so you have this really nicely finished end, and the last thing to do there is to add your crimp cover. So I like to pick up my crimp cover in the outside groove of my crimpers, and I usually like to actually hold the AccuGuard in my hand like that. So I have a lot of control over where the crimp cover goes. Bring that on and crimp it closed. And then kind of go around in a circle a little bit. Just make sure that you round it out nicely. You want it to look like a little metal ball bead at the end. And there you have your finished end. Then I'm just going to thread on the CZ ball. Then I'm going to thread on my crimp bead, the simplest possible necklace you can make here. And then thread on my AccuGuard. So I threaded through one hole, bring it around, and then through the other hole. Okay, so then I'm going to bring my crimp bead over the tail. Now it's really important here at this step that you measure. So I'm going to go ahead and close up the AccuGuard so it's touching, the little tips are touching. Then I'm going to grab my measuring implement, and I want this to be about 15 inches. We have the clasp length as well. I want the overall to be 15 inches. And the clasp and the jump rings are taking up about an inch. So in total, I really want this to be about 14 inches. So you always have to take into consideration the length of your clasp. So I'm measuring this, and I'm going to put the AccuGuard through the round nose plier barrel and pull until I get to 14 inches. So I'm just measuring this along. I've got the other end at the end of the ruler. So I'm measuring, and I'm going to measure a couple times before I cut it. I really want to just make sure that it's exact. In jewelry, millimeters count, so you want things to be pretty precise. I feel that's a really good spot right there. Let me put my ruler aside. Okay. So I'm going to grab my crimp bead lightly, pull it up against the AccuGuard so it takes up all the slack, and then I'm going to back it off about 1 millimeter so there's room for my crimp cover, and crimp nice and tight. Okay, so I'm going around making sure that it's crimped nice and tight. For insurance, I'm just giving it an extra crimp with my chain nose pliers. Cutting off the tail. And then adding the crimp cover. Crimp that on nice and tight, go around and make it a ball. Okay. So now we have the first layer of the necklace made. I'm going to set this aside, and we'll put them all on the clasp at the end after all 3 layers have been made. Okay, so we've got a second layer here, which is just a larger ball and a bit longer. So we're going to do the exact same thing, just with a larger ball. Okay, so let's look at the necklace again. We'll do that last layer. And you can see here we have 2 separate strands of AccuFlex coming down through this 2-hole bead here. And they end just slightly offset from one another, and with just a few more quartz on one side than the other. So let's go ahead and measure off the AccuFlex for one side of this necklace. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull off my AccuFlex. And I'll pull off a little bit more than I need, as usual. The materials list for this is in the description, so if you'd like to make this piece, you can find that there. As well, if you're enjoying the content that we're bringing, if you're enjoying the video, please like, share, subscribe, comment. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to interact with you. Okay. So I'm going to prepare the crimped end just as we have been doing. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and thread on the elements that we see here on the side. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, let's see, 2, 4, 6 of the rondelles. And then I've got a couple of square quartz interspersed there, so we'll grab a couple of those. So you can see that I have this section threaded on. So I'm going to go through one of the holes in my 2-hole bead. These are really nice, unique finding, these 2-hole barrels. It's got like a pinched barrel look. Then you can see that I have measured and crimped a crimp bead here toward the end. And what that does is act as a stopper. So I'm going to measure against the one that I have here. So I want my stopper to be right about there. So I'm going to kind of mark that with my fingernail and then add on a crimp bead and let it fall to where my fingernail is, just like that. And that's marking where I want that stopper to be. Then I'm going to go ahead and just crimp that closed right over the wire. And I want to make sure that I do crimp it nice and tight, because when going over one wire, there's not enough bulk in the middle to take up a lot of space. So you have to be kind of extra careful. And I'm just going to pull. That's nice and tight. And then I'll put my crimp cover right over that. Okay, and then you can see that I have 3 more rondelles, or we're on the other side, we flipped it around there. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more rondelles at the bottom there, so I'll grab 5 more rondelles. Okay, and I let those fall right against the stopper that I made. Then I'll thread on one of these smaller CZ balls. And then I'm just going to crimp the end. And again, you have to be really careful to crimp this nice and tight because you don't want it coming apart. So I'm going to thread on my crimp bead and let it fall right against my CZ ball. Grab my crimper here and loosely, I'm just going to back it off just a millimeter from the ball so there's space to put my crimp cover, and I'm going to crimp it really, nice and tight. There we go. And then I'll go around and kind of round it out with the outside edge of my crimper. Okay, so then I'll go ahead and add my crimp cover. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and snip the extra wire. I did test it, it was good. So I'll snip the extra wire off with my flush cutters. And then add the crimp cover. You can do it either way, but this is probably the better. Okay, so there you have one side of the necklace, and then you're just going to repeat for the other side, make it just a few millimeters longer. I'd say maybe 10 millimeters longer on this side than the other side, and just a few less beads, okay? And then we're just going to attach those to the necklace. Okay, so you can see that I prepared the second side just as I had the first. I put it through the second hole in this 2-hole bead, created my stopper, threaded on the rest of my beads, and then we'll just finish that off with this crimped stopper on the end. Now we have this layer of the necklace completed. That's the third and final layer. And then we're just going to add those layers to the clasps. So the way that I do that is I just lay them out the way that they're going to be. I'll stack them. So when you're making a design like this with exposed AccuFlex, it's important to know how to store it. The exposed AccuFlex is a little bit different than a regular strung design where the beads go all the way through. You just have to take a little bit of care not to kink that AccuFlex, so store it hanging up. So everything's the direction that I want it to go. The clasp that we're using is just a simple lobster claw with a really pretty CZ finish. So you can use a jump ring tool to open these. Today I'm just using a couple of pairs of pliers. So I'll take my bent nose pliers and I kind of turn them around this way, and I'll clamp my jump ring in the bent nose on this side with the opening right up here near the tip. And I get a lot of pressure on that so it doesn't go anywhere. And I open it sideways as you always do with a jump ring. So I'm going to take my outside, my longest necklace layer, and apply that to the jump ring. And then the middle. And then the smallest. And then I'm going to put on one end of the clasp and just close up that jump ring. And I'm going to close it right back the way that I opened it, sideways. And I'm going to rock the tips of the jump ring back and forth against each other just a few times to make sure I have a nice tight connection. And then I'm going to take a second jump ring, position that in my pliers just the way I did last time with the opening near the tip. Open that sideways. And this time I'm going to take the smallest, the medium, and then the longest. Make sure that those are not tangled up. Okay, I'm going to grab that with my other hand so I can get it through the correct side of the clasp here. And I'm going to go through this ring that is included in the clasp. And just rock those tips together and make sure I have a nice tight connection. Okay, so now you have your beautiful set of quartz and CZ necklace and earrings. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please take that little minute to like, subscribe, and comment. We'd love to talk to you if you have any questions. And if you're making something similar, make sure and put up a picture of that. We'd love to see your work. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time at Fire Mountain Gems and Beads.